as member of the railroad community. I retired in 2009 and became part of the community of retired railroad workers. And also I am secretary of the Texas Alliance for Retired Americans. The senator has been a champion. There's no question about the senator representing the right issues, not only for retirees, but for the community at all, in all places. He is a man that, unlike many others, will never sell you out for the sake of a vote. And so we're very proud and welcome you to Austin to give us a few words. But I first want to say that thank you for the issues on Social Security, which are probably the most important for the community in the country, to make sure that the most vulnerable of retirees are not going to suffer because they don't have enough money to live gracefully. Senator, you have the floor.
Well, thank you all very much for being here. And Kim, thank you for organizing this event. And Tony, thank you very much for your kind words. We have worked together for many, many years. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that we are living in a pivotal and momentous moment in American history. And the bottom line is that today, hard to believe, but today the United States is the wealthiest country on earth, and today it is a wealthier nation than it has ever been. That's the good news. The bad news is that almost all of that wealth rests in the hands of the top few percent. And I just came back from Washington. Before I began this trip in Los Angeles, I was on the floor of the Senate for a week as the ranking member of the Budget Committee. I'm an independent, I caucus with the Democrats, and my role is to lead the opposition to the Republicans on the budget. And the media forgot to report it, but what the Republican budget did in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world is to say that we can't afford health insurance for 27 million Americans. We're throwing them off of health care. That means ending the Affordable Care Act, 16 million, cutting Medicaid by 440 billion, another 11 million. In the richest country in the history of the world, the Republicans said that we're going to make it significantly harder for working class young people to go to college by cutting $90 billion over a 10-year period in Pell Grants. Pell Grants, as you know, are the largest source of federal funding for grants and scholarships for low-income and working class people. In a nation, and I know this is true here in Texas, and it's certainly true in Vermont, where we have people struggling to put food on the table. They don't enjoy the beautiful lunch we just had. And many of them are working 40, 50 hours a week and still not earning enough money to feed their family. They go to the emergency food shelves. Republicans just proposed massive cuts in nutrition programs. And in the midst of all that, they found the time to give huge tax breaks to the top 0.3% by repealing completely the estate tax in the budget. This is their proposal. And also raising taxes on the middle class and working families by not allowing the extension that we put in the stimulus package on the earned income tax credit and the children's tax credit. And on top of all of that, because they're terribly concerned about the deficit, they added $38 billion to the military off budget. That was the Republican budget that passed. In my mind, the issues that we have got to focus on in this country is income and wealth inequality. I just want to give you a few examples. I won't bore you with a lot of statistics, but I want you to listen up to this one. Forbes magazine very recently reported that in the last 2 years, from 2013 to 2015, the wealthiest 14 people in the country, that's the number of people that sit around this table, saw a $157 billion increase in their wealth in a 2-year period. $157 billion, 14 people, 2 years. That $157 billion is more wealth than is owned by the bottom 40% of the American people, which is what the richest 14 people saw in 2 years. 99% of all new income generated in America is now going to the top 1%. The top 1/10 of 1% owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%. So we are looking at disparities in wealth and income that are absolutely unprecedented. You know, when we were kids and we went to school, we studied about oligarchic forms of society, where a few people had it all. Well, I don't want to break the bad news to you, but you're looking at that taking place right here in the United States. And to make a bad situation even scarier, as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, these very same people who have unlimited resources can now put as much as they want into the political process to elect people who will support them. And then on top of all of that, we got a Republican Party which has rejected science and which has decided that climate change is not climate change is not real, or if it is real, it is certainly not caused by carbon emissions and human activity. And in fact, what we should do, maybe this is sacrilegious here in the state of Texas, but what we should do is do more and more fossil fuel and slow the development of wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and other sustainable energies. So other than that, I think the Republicans are doing a great job. I think they are speaking to the needs of working families. And what I hear over and over again, I think Ed just mentioned it, or somebody at the table here just mentioned it, is that, you know, sadly, and I speak as an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, to a much too significant degree, Democrats do not talk about the real issues impacting the working class of this country. And the result has been is the working class in this country does not vote for Democrats. Not very hard. But the problem that you have, which gets back to money in politics, is if you're going to talk about the real issues, you have to move toward an understanding that we don't make change in this country unless we are prepared to take on the billionaire class. That's it. It can't be otherwise. Now, there are things you can do. We saw something very interesting taking place around this business in Indiana over the last few days. And then you saw a whole lot of people saying that the discrimination that Indiana wants to practice against gays is unacceptable. You have a whole lot of CEOs standing up and saying the right thing. But people can talk out on social issues, but they're not going to, these CEOs will not be there on the economic issues. So what we have got to do is rally the American people and make them understand that if the Koch brothers are prepared to spend $900 million in this election cycle, maybe politics is important. If it's important to the Koch brothers, it's important to every working person in this country. And we have got to come forward with a progressive agenda that makes sense to people, and we have to hold elected officials accountable that they're going to implement that agenda. Now, let me conclude by picking up on a point that Tony said. And it's an example, a limited example, of where we can have some success. For many years, the big money interests, for a variety of reasons, have wanted to either cut or privatize Social Security. Bush tried to privatize it, that wasn't successful. You have Pete Peterson. You all know who Pete Peterson is? Pete's one of the poor guys. He's only in the low billions of dollars. Hasn't made it to the $80 billion, but he has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to cut Social Security quite literally. And we had a virtually united Republican Party saying, let's cut Social Security, and a number of Democrats saying that as well. And sadly, the President of the United States came out with a so-called change body which would cut COLAs for seniors and disabled veterans. We organized very heavily with senior groups all over this country, and we rallied millions of people. And the result of that is the Republicans are now backing off because they don't see it as politically a smart thing to do. They will be back, to be sure, but right now they're backing off on cuts on Social Security. What's the lesson? lesson is that when you mobilize people, when you educate people, and people get involved in the political process, we can start doing some good things. Now, in terms of Social Security, what people like Elizabeth Warren and I are doing, and we've introduced the legislation to do this, it's not just stop cuts to Social Security, but to expand Social Security benefits, which is something that is very seriously needed. So I would be happy to take any questions that anyone has. One request, Jeb Bush is apparently embarrassed by the huge amounts of money that he's raising. He has insisted, and I will insist, nobody here can make a contribution of more than $1 million. I do not want to argue the point. Yes, sir. Okay. Any questions or thoughts? Yes, sir.
I don't know what your stand on immigration issue is, but I would like to know.
Sure. I support comprehensive immigration reform. I think we have some 11 million people in this country who are undocumented, and I think we've got to work toward a path toward citizenship for those people. The one concern that I did have, when we talk about immigration broadly, in the bill, and I voted for the last Senate bill, there are things that I don't like. And what are the things that I don't like? There are two parts of the bill. One says a path to citizenship for the people here, and that is absolutely right. And I strongly support the DREAM Act for that. But there's another part of it that Wall Street and the big money interests like. You know what that is? That is to be able to bring cheap labor into this country. That's what it's about. That's why Wall Street and the big money interests love immigration reform. If you think they're staying up nights worrying about undocumented workers in this country, that's not their motive. Their motive is to see that we bring in more people who work for very low wages. And I would not have supported the bill, by the way, unless I got $1.5 billion amendment, which would provide for summer work programs and youth employment programs for kids in this country. So that's part of the immigration bill that passed the Senate. Other questions? Sir.
Why do you think Obama is pressing for this TPP?
Good question. And we thought about it. And it's interesting. And I should tell you, I like President Obama. Obviously, he and I had serious disagreements, including the TPP. And I was on the floor some years ago for 8.5 hours in opposition to his view on extending Bush's tax cuts. The trade policies of America since NAFTA have been a perfect example of the power of corporate money over the political process. Because if anyone wants to simply blame the Republicans for our trade policies, NAFTA, CAFTA, free trade with China, you would be wrong. It is very bipartisan. Republican presidents, Democratic presidents. To his credit, you do not hear Obama talking about what the other guys were talking about. The other people were talking about is, vote for NAFTA, it's going to create millions of jobs. Vote for the Chinese free trade. Obama's not talking about that. I think privately what Obama might say to you is, look, past trade agreements have not been all that good. What this one will do is maybe control China, put us, in other words, he's not touting all of the millions of jobs he's going to create. I don't think he believes it. But to answer your question in a nutshell, it is the power. This is an agreement that every major multinational on Wall Street won. And I'm afraid that most leaders do not stand up for that.
So kind of following up, what is your take on Obama and the Democratic Party? What is the possibility of building some kind of bipartisan progressive agenda?
Some kind of bipartisan progressive agenda?
Bipartisan being independent progressive agenda.
Oh.
Not Democratic, not Republican.
Well, the issue of working, you're talking to the longest serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. You're talking to a guy who in 1981 defeated the Democratic Party to become mayor of Burlington, Vermont, and then defeated Democrats and Republicans. So I know a little bit about the subject. The dilemma you have politically in America now is the Republican Party, which under people like Dwight David Eisenhower was a kind of a centrist right party. Conservative, a modest conservative party, has become a right-wing extremist party, owned by folks like the Copelands. The Democratic Party has moved from a party of the working class under FDR and Truman to be a centrist party, which has some great people in it, who fight for working people, but also has some people who are not radically different from Republicans. If the question is, can you develop a third party? Is that your question?
I don't know if that's my question or not.
Oh, help me out here. What I would say is at this moment, there is a lot of frustration with both parties, but the idea of going outside the two-party system is harder than it looks. In other words, trying to get on the ballot in 50 states would require an enormous amount of time, energy, and money. It can be done, but it would be very, very difficult. But what I would also say is there are times and places. I have supported independent candidates running for here, this, and that. And I think there are times and places where that's appropriate, whether it can be done nationally or not.
Well, I'm not so much a third party, but even a progressive agenda.
Oh, an agenda.
When we start talking about, I mean, the 99% thing caught on, and it's kind of not going away.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
No, well, I mean, it could be a third party. I don't know if that's the answer either.
We have, if you look, go to my website, which is sanders.senate.gov, and you will see what we consider to be a progressive agenda. We laid out 12 points. The creation of millions of jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure, raising wages with the minimum wage, with overtime, with pay equity, ending bad trade policies, national health care for all people, we're going to introduce legislation within a month which will make, if passed, tuition in public colleges and universities free.
But isn't it the 800-pound elephant in the room, the military budget, and our overstepping?
It's a very, I wouldn't say it's the, no, I would say income and wealth inequality is a more important issue, but it is a huge issue, your point. And whether or not, I got to tell you, that a lot of my Republican colleagues in the Senate are hot to trot. They're apparently a little bored that we're not involved in a hot war in the last year. We've only been in 2 major wars over the last 10 years, and they need a third war. They're not sure where. Might be Syria, might be Iran, but they are looking at that.
Well, you just point out that he added $38 billion and they're taking away food stamps from people at the same time that they're doing that. So when I'm talking about building a progressive agenda, how do we
That's part of it. That's absolutely true. Yes. So all I'm saying, it's not the only factor, but it's an important one. Yes, ma'am.
I believe the last time we had an independent running was Ross Perot. Are you saying that you would be running as a Democrat then, or with the endorsement of the Democratic Party, or saying you're independent, but you are the closest thing to?
Well, let me differentiate myself. Ross had a lot of money. I don't. No, what I'm saying is I have not decided whether I will run for president. But I will tell you something. The reason I've been running around the country is to kind of ascertain what kind of support there is for a progressive agenda. And I've been blown away by what we've experienced on this trip. I've never seen anything like it, and that's just not ego tripping here. We did an event in Los Angeles on a hot Sunday. Well, I guess it's always hot in Los Angeles. To me, it seemed very hot from Vermont. And like we had 500 or 600 people coming. We did an event. Was anybody at the event here last night at the IPW? Quite a few people out there.
Oh, I couldn't get more.
The place couldn't fill anyway. We had 500 people out of that one. And we did one with the union in Las Vegas. The place was packed. So my sense is that there is a hunger out there to hear an agenda that says that America does not belong to the top 1%. Now, the choice that I have to make as an independent, elected in Vermont as an independent, but somebody who's caucused within the Democratic caucus for the last 24 years, is which route do you go? And if I run, I will make that choice. But at this point, I think it's the idea of going outside the two-party system would be a pretty hard
Could you do both?
You talked about working with Elizabeth Warren, and I don't think many people saw the Frontline series in which she was the only voice who tried to foretell the disastrous financial crisis that was happening or going to happen in 2007 and 8. And now we hear that the credit default swaps have been approved again. So how do we get this message out?
Well, let me just say something. I happen to love Elizabeth. I've known Elizabeth for many years. What you said is not quite factually correct.
Okay, please correct me.
I helped lead the effort against the deregulation of abortion. Elizabeth is great on these issues. But I think if you go to YouTube, look up Bernie Sanders and Alan Greenspan, check out the discussion that Greenspan and I had when he came before the House Financial Services Committee. I think you'll find, sadly, virtually everything that I predicted would happen. But what you're indicating is just recently Wall Street was able to get a key provision of Dodd-Frank rescinded because it is not correct to believe that Congress regulates Wall Street. Wall Street regulates Congress. And I introduced legislation a little bit ahead of the curve, I must say, which several years ago said just that. We can't regulate Wall Street. And it's time to break up these large financial institutions. You have 6 banks that have assets of about $10 trillion, which is equivalent to 60% of GDP in the United States. They issue half the mortgages and 2/3 of the credit cards. What would Teddy Roosevelt do if he were around today? I think he'd say it's time to break them up. And we've introduced legislation in the past not to do that. Yes, sir.
It seems to be a lot of the impediments to empowering progressives, liberals, are come from the state level. Gerrymandering, winner take all, non-progressive voting. And you mentioned one that does happen at the federal level, citizens are not even able to be financed. And not to play down the issues of economic equity on the issues, what can you do from Washington to empower us with most of our, I think, the impediments of the state level?
You're right. You know, somebody was saying this here at the table. In a sense, what Republicans are doing is not new. The word gerrymandering comes after a guy named Jerry, G-E-R-R-Y, who I think, correct me if I'm wrong, around way back when?
Vice President.
Was he Vice President? When was that? Way back in
Late 18th century.
late 18th century. All right. So gerrymandering held new concept. But what the Republicans often do, and this is their modus, you know, the way they function, is they take things that people have done in the past and they carry it to an entirely new level. So you're telling me, I learned here that in Austin, you have your congressman living in Fort Worth? So,
In my section of Austin,
You have 5. The where Austin's cut up by 5. And they take big, long, skinny trips to San Antonio, Houston, Dallas.
Trips to Mexico.
all right, so what they have done is they've taken a concept, you know, people have always tried to manipulate boundaries for their own advantages. But what they have gone is gone completely off the wall. Voter suppression is, to me, it is nauseating. Because what it tells me is these people don't have the guts, and I can understand why, to stand on their ideas. The only way they win elections is by preventing people from voting. But we went through a civil rights revolution to make sure that people can vote, and they're going out of their way now to make it harder for people to vote. And then you got Citizens United and et cetera, et cetera. All I can tell you, you're absolutely right. Look, these guys, that's what oligarchy is about. They want to keep the poor and working class down and doing any and every way they can. And we have got to wage war in every way that we can, through the courts, through the Justice Department. I don't think that the Obama people have been as aggressive as they should be. Other questions? Yes, sir.
you mentioned climate change, and everyone knows that this is going on in Austin. We're in Texas. We're in, I believe, our 6th year of drought, water issues, and so forth. Like, yet on the national level, there's no movement, and people are throwing snowballs on the Senate floor and so forth.
That's not people. That's my friend Jim.
Yeah. First of all, do they actually believe the things they say when they deny climate change, or is this being fed to them completely? And is there any hope that we'll see any movement? What will it take?
Do they believe what they say? I suspect most of them don't. You know, I am on the 3rd floor of the Dirksen office building, down the hallway from me is a guy named John Barrasso from Wyoming. And John is a medical doctor. He's a pretty smart guy. I met his kids who have PhDs in biochemistry or something like that. Do I believe that John, in his heart of hearts, believes that virtually the entire scientific community is wrong in saying that climate change is real and caused by human activity? And in fact, I'm on the committee with them, and I don't see them touting that one. But what John understands, as does most of the Republican Party, that the Koch brothers, for obvious reasons, because they make most of their money from fossil fuel, they believe, or they want to believe, or they want to tell you, that climate change is either not real or not caused by human activity. The oil companies, the Exxon Mobils of the world, want you to believe that as well. And do the Republicans, the average Republican, have the courage to stand up to them? No, they don't. Now, I put on 2 occasions, including this last week, an amendment on the floor to force them to vote. The amendment says, in so many words, we agree that climate change is real, that it's caused by human activity and already causing devastating problems. I think we got 5 Republicans to vote for that. But to answer your question, I think, no, in the case of Jim Inhofe, the answer is no, he does not. He really does not. But I think many of them do, but that's where their money comes from. In terms of what can we do, under Obama, we have made some modest progress. We have seen some real advances in solar. How are you guys doing in solar in Texas?
Slow, but it's coming.
Okay. And you got a state which has a lot of sunshine. Yeah? You've done better with wind. I think you're doing better with wind.
It mandates for utilities. Isn't Burlington the first city to be totally off fossil fuels?
Maybe, I don't know, but we have moved pretty aggressively with hydro and wind and solar. There's huge potential. There is huge potential against Republican obstructionism in terms of extending tax credits to solar and wind, and not giving us the kind of tax credits that we need. We've seen real gains. In wind, Iowa is going to have, I think in a couple of years, 40% of their electricity coming from wind. In terms of energy efficiency, I think we've scratched the surface. We have older homes in Vermont and around the country that are wasting huge amounts of fuel, older buildings. We can create jobs, the weatherization. We want to save energy, build a real 21st century rail system and get cars and trucks off the road.
Yes.
There's so much that we can do. And we can lead the world. We develop the technology, we can sell it to China and to India and other countries, Russia. So we've made modest progress. Obama, to his credit, not for the right reasons, but did veto the Keystone Pipeline, which tells the world that the United States will not support the exploration and transportation of some of the dirtiest fossil fuel on the planet. So we're making modest progress, but there's huge potential, huge potential. And the goal is obviously to transform our energy system away from fossil fuels to energy efficiency and sustainability. Yes?
There has been a lot of evidence of the failure of the tough on crime approach across the nation, communities across the areas. In Texas, we have been fighting back with a smart on crime approach that is focusing on recalibration of minor criminal penalties, making sure that jails for people who pose a threat to the community, not people we're mad at, trying to create specialty courts and diversion programs and restoration programs to divert people from a criminal lifestyle and keep them out of a criminal lifestyle once they're through the process. How is that playing at the federal level? Is it still tough on crime, or are they beginning to have more smart?
Well, I'll tell you, no, there has been, first of all, everything you're saying is exactly right. Here's one of the crazy things. We don't talk about it very much. China is an authoritarian communist government. And its population is, what, 3 times the size of the U.S., something like that? At least 3 times. We have more people in jail in the United States than China does. How do you like that? More people in jail. Now, what has happened, I think, is not the rational approach that you just brought forth. But many governors are looking around and they're saying, it costs $50,000 to put a kid in jail. And most of the time they get out of jail, they go back because they learn how to be a better criminal while they're in jail. Maybe this is not a sensible approach from a financial point of view. That, I think, has been a major motivator for people to begin thinking about alternatives. We have, and this is just a huge issue, we got 5.5 million young people in this country, young people, who dropped out of high school, which is a serious problem in America. or graduated high school, didn't get a job. 5.5 million kids. And you know what they're doing right now, these kids? They're standing on street corners in Austin, Texas, and Burlington, Vermont, and they're going to get into trouble. And some of them are going to end up in jail. So if your point is that we invest in these kids, we focus on these kids, we do job training for these kids, we do education for these kids, that it is not only the right thing to do from a moral perspective and a humane perspective, but it's a good financial investment, you are right 10 times over. And that's an area we have absolutely, and I think whenever you do it, I think in Chicago, for example, as I recall, they focus on these kids who are most likely to join gangs, and they had good results. Summer jobs rather than gang jobs. Makes sense to me. Yes.
What do you think
Stand up
of,
so they can hear me.
what do you think of the Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act and the fix that's proposed currently?
Oh, God. Well, what can I tell you?
I mean, we're included, Texas is, but only 4 states out of 50, right?
Well, the answer is, getting back to the question I think that you asked me, it's not, you know, what can I tell you about the Supreme Court? They are decision after decision making, doing terrible things to our country. But it is not just restoring the Voting Rights Act, which some of us are trying to do. It's more than that. Because we're not just worried about, you know, a number of southern states or states that have history with racist attempts to deprive African Americans with the right to vote. The problem has spread well beyond that. And that there are now states out there, as we talked about, who are coming up with all of these phony anti-voter fraud approaches where there is no voter fraud. And we know what the goal is. So we need a national effort to say that our goal is not just not to suppress the vote, it's to expand the vote. We had an election in November where 36% of the people voted. People here at the state were telling me in an Austin runoff election you had 5%, 6% of the people voting. This is embarrassing. And we have got to figure, and this is, you know, I talk about this as part of a political revolution in this country, to make people understand what living in a democratic society is about. In Denmark, in their last election, they had over 85% of the people voting. And maybe that is the reason why they have health care for all and free college education and a strong child care system. It might have something to do with people who are politically conscious and understand that government should represent everybody and not just the billionaire class. So, to answer your question, we've got to go beyond just restoring the Voting Rights Act. Okay, 1 or 2 questions more? All right, again, no checks more than $1 million. All right, let me just, yeah, Tony.
Senator, I do want to make a presentation to you, if you don't mind, and my fellow man, Jack McCabe, and I would like to come up.
Please, please, please.
And I'll read this very small letter, short letter. Check for $500 from railroad retirees, the National Association of Retired and Veteran Railway Employees. And it says, on behalf of the National Association of Railroad and Veteran Railway Employees, we are making a contribution of $500 to your campaign as you are a champion who is not afraid to stand up for the retirees, for the people, for the seniors, and stand up for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And you never stop fighting for us. And thank you for introducing to, we wanted to scrap the cap, but you went up and you increased it from 115 thousand to 285, which would make Social Security solvent for many years to come. And here's the check, and here's the letter.
Thank you very much.